My name is Ophelia Weeks. Presently, I serve as the Executive Director of the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Presidential Center for Women and Development. Well, my father is Rochefort Lafayette Weeks. He's the Croziervillian. My mother is Euphemie Geraldine Cooper Weeks. She's originally from Kipalmas. And my grandfather, John Isaac Alexander Weeks, or Reverend John Isaac Alexander Weeks, was the only child of his parents. His mother and father were on the Brig Cora that landed in Liberia in 1865. His mother was, I think, about 7 or 8 years old, and his father was 6. So they were on that ship with their parents. So naturally, my grandfather is a Weeks, and his wife is a Thorpe, I think it is. Her name was Elsa Dorinda Thorpe. Now, I will probably have to go and look on the gravestone to verify that. Right in the back of Reeves Memorial United Methodist Church in Crozierville. And and they lived here in Crozierville. They had one son. Ultimately, they married and had a son, John Isaac Alexander. My grandfather was a farmer. He was a pastor. He was a teacher and a strict disciplinarian. He wasn't a wealthy man. He wasn't a tall man. He was a really short man. But he was tall and wealthy in his perspective on life and his insistence and the importance of a good education. He also instilled in his children's head and in their minds that to be successful, especially since you're not wealthy, you needed to have a good education. Nobody could ever take that away from you. And hard work was essential. What a lot of people don't know, they think that we come from a wealthy family, but we do not. My father and his brothers went to school barefooted, and they had to walk a couple of miles. And before they went to school, they had chores that they had to do, like work in the farm and work on the land. Father, Rochefort Lafayette Weeks, he did his primary and secondary schooling here in Crozierville. He went to Liberia College. He graduated, I think, in 1944 or something like that. Liberia College was what became the University of Liberia, ultimately. My mother and my father actually traveled on the same ship in 1949 to go to Howard University. He was coming to Howard University to study law, and she was traveling to Howard University to study, I think it was secretarial science at the time. And I guess somewhere along the way between Liberia and the United States, they got together And ultimately, when they got to the States, they got married and began a family. And he went to Howard University and received his law degree at Howard University, his LLB. And then went to Cornell University, where he received his master's in law. They returned to him in 1955. So he worked in the office of the vice president when he came back home. And ultimately, as a very young man in his 30s, he was asked to serve as president of the University of Liberia, and that was in 1959. Prior to that, presidents of the University of Liberia had all been Americans. And so he was the first Liberian. And he remained president of the University of Liberia for 11 years. So he's also, to date, the longest serving president of the University of Liberia. He, after serving as president of the University of Liberia for 11 years, he was asked to serve as Secretary of State. So he was the last Secretary of State of the Republic of Liberia and the first Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Liberia. He also served as the maritime representative in Washington, D.C. Well, the office was in Reston, Virginia. He served in that capacity, head of maritime. And he returned to Liberia in, I think it was 1984, so either 82 or 84, and to private life. He and my mother also built a house in Crozierville, and that's where they moved to ultimately to stay. I recall as a young girl also, before that house was even built, my mother would come up to Crozierville and plant coconut trees and plum trees or mango trees, butterpear, avocado trees, orange trees and stuff. And I would come up with her and we would plant various trees in the yard. And that house took my father years to build. I think he started building it in 1972. He didn't finish building it perhaps until, even at that, it wasn't completed, but they moved in, I think, in 1982 or 84 when they returned back to Liberia. So it took him about 10 years to build it. And the house is in Crozierville, like I mentioned, and it's serving the township very well. It's filling a void. So there are plans for the kids, there are plans for adults, but currently a portion of the house serves as a convenience center for the township. So I digress, but going back to my dad, he, after leaving maritime, he became a private citizen and served as commissioner for the township of Crozierville. Continued to be very active in the church, as have always been the case with my uncles, aunts, cousins, etc. He also played a very important role in being on the committee that did the amendments to the Constitution in 1986. He was on that committee as well. Just my uncles alone, I have one of my uncles served as Minister of Treasury, Secretary of the Treasury. I don't know if it wasn't Minister of Finance at that time, or was it Minister of Finance at that time?
I think it was all secretaries until that
transition, yeah. And also of planning. There were, I should say that my father died in 1986. He was in his 63rd year, so I've surpassed that now. And I think he died before his time because it was a simple thing like a perforated ulcer that should have been caught, but it wasn't. And he had to be ultimately transported to Grand Bassa to get hospital attention. By that time, several days had gone by. And in essence, he died of septicemia. Mother was, she died, it seems just like yesterday, but it was 2016, October 6th. And I didn't say the date my dad died. It was 1986, it was March 4th. Our parents were disciplinarians also. They too believed in, it wasn't a question. You graduated from high school, there was no ifs, ands, buts, or maybes. You went to college. That was it, period. If you didn't want to go beyond that, that was left up to you. But you went to college. And I think it was a spillover from what the belief of my grandfather of the importance of an education. So they didn't spoil us. Every single one of us had chores. And one of the other good things that I liked about my parents, they were not boys' choice or girls' choice. My brothers had to clean up and do housework, just like I had to clean up and do housework. And we all had different parts of the house that we were responsible for. My brother would tell you that one of my brothers, his chore was to make sure that my father's shoes were all clean and some other things. My older brother had to make sure that the living room and dining room were clean, and the older kids took care of the younger kids. I, from a very young age, 14, was in charge of going to the market, general market, and buying groceries, going to the supermarket, buying groceries. And the other thing was that, I'm going around, but it will come back together. The other thing was that when you were given money to go out and do a purchase, even if you had 2 cents left over, you had to report it. Now, I say this to say that those things carried over into who we are today. One, that idea of being in charge of another human being, even though that was your brother or your sister at a young age, helped us to learn the value of service and being responsible for other people. The thing about the money, when you were sent to buy something, and even if you had a penny left, taught us about honesty and the respect for other people's money. It's not yours, no matter how much, no matter how little. And so for the things that I liked about my parents was that they loved us. They always showed us love. They showed us, they provided us with what we needed, sometimes what we wanted, but they also were very sure to let us know that you take nothing for granted, that you earned things, that you worked hard for them, and that you made sure that people didn't take advantage of you. And that latter part is because if you understood things the likelihood of people taking advantage of you is diminished. And that's where also education comes in. Nobody can ever take that away from you. My parents were very young when they got married. My mother was, I think when she had me, she was about 21 or 23. And I always wondered how they learned to be such good parents at such a young age. My dad was, I think, 4 years older than my mother. Crozierville, we always came up to Crozierville for church on Sundays. And I loved coming up to Crozierville. The only part I didn't like, and my mother used to remind me, was during the rainy season. And that's about almost 6 months out of the year. Crozierville is a township that has a lot of creeks, so that means there are lots of bridges. And many of the bridges were wooden bridges. And my mother said I used to call them bridges with no arms. Many times during the hard or rainy season, the bridges would be overrun by water. So we had to get out of the car and walk across. I don't know why, but we had to get out of the car and walk across, and the car would go over, and then we'll get on the other side. That was the part I didn't like the most. The other part, well, I shouldn't say the most. One of the things I didn't like. The other thing that I didn't like was the outside toilets, because I always thought I would fall in. I don't know if probably many people, unless you're of a certain age, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But these were this wooden or zinc place outside of the house that had a wooden seat with a hole that you had to do your business. And, as kids would be, you look down and you will see all of these things crawling there, all of the waste material in there, and the idea of falling there was not a pleasant thing. So anyways, Sundays we would come to church, and then after church we would go over to my grandfather's house that's right next to the church. And we would have dinner there. Many times it would be split peas and chicken gravy, or boiled cabbage and chicken gravy, or white beans and gravy. So it was always some kind of beans and gravy for Sunday. And then we would stop to all of the various cousins to say hello. And being where it is, we would always be leaving with either a bag full of, or a pan full of golden plums, or sour plums, or oranges, or plums, mangoes, or bananas, plantains, and those were things that I liked. Climbing the rose apple tree, climbing the guava tree, picking the fruits and stuff. So those are times that I really looked forward to, of course, except for the toilet part and the bridge. And I always felt that when I built my house, it would be in Crozierville, no matter what. I hope by now you get a sense that over the years of coming on a regular basis to church, of running around and climbing trees and eating fruits and going to see relatives, that there is a connection that sometimes is difficult to actually quantify. It's more of a qualitative connection, which generally it's more the qualitative, the emotional things that are so strong. Reeves Memorial United Methodist Church, the church in missions. That church, when we started going to the church, I remember it was, I think it may have been a zinc building. or probably, I want to think maybe mud. But I recall there were times when there were no chairs. We sat in the church on cinder blocks. There were no windows. And over the years, the church evolved. So the zinc came down, concrete blocks came up. There were benches, like sticks, blocks with sticks on. That's what we sat on. And over the years, the various families that lived in Crozierville contributed to the church. The church has been around since 1879. The first church in Crozierville is called First Church, and it's an Episcopalian church. And I suspect over time people were of different denominations, branched off. So the settlers came in 1865, and Reeves Memorial came about in 1879. And we have been, I don't know of any other church that I attended as a child other than going to visit, other than Reeves Memorial United Methodist Church, and I continue to this day. My siblings are all actively involved in the church, and I serve as historian for the church. So yes, there's a very strong connection, and the next major project that we're going to launch sometime the latter part of this year is the children's ministry. We're building a facility for the children so that there's a place for Sunday school and for other activities for children. The church has at any given time over 100 children at service, when you might have 4 male adults and probably 10 female adults, and probably an additional 10 or so young adults, etc. Children can number anywhere from 40-something to 100 and something. So we have a very large children population in the church, our congregation in the church, which is a good thing. It's good to have young people, because that in a sense perhaps ensures that there's longevity. So we hope that will get underway, and hopefully by the end of next year, we will have a new wing to the Reeves Memorial United Methodist Church. And I'll use this opportunity to make a call out for folks who have ties. There's a sense of duty, actually. I talked before about the fact that it's important to provide service and to give back. The person who I am today is because of my upbringing in Liberia. From the age of 3, because my parents were in school in the States when I was born. And when they came back, I was about 3 years old. From B.W. Payne Kindergarten, that's on Camp Johnson Road, that's where I went to kindergarten, and it's still there. Then I went to Demonstration Elementary School on, Clay Street, and St. Teresa's Convent from the 3rd grade, CWA, College of West Africa, from the 8th grade. I went to the University of Liberia. Actually, people don't know this, but, some do. There was a men's dormitory and a women's dormitory on the Capitol Hill campus. I lived in that dormitory. as a resident my first year, even though I was living on the University of Liberia campus. What people don't know is that the president of the university lived on the University of Liberia campus. And practically all of my life I've lived on a university campus. From the age of 8, when my parents moved to live on the campus because my father became the president of the university. And so the president lived on campus. I live on I lived with my parents. I was a kid. Like I said, from the age of 8 until college. In 1969, 10 years later, when I became a freshman at the University of Liberia. So I was there for a year and a half, and then matriculated, transferred to McGill University in Montreal. Got an undergraduate degree in microbiology. Then went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. Received a PhD in neuroanatomy. And then went to Emory University in Atlanta and was a postdoctoral fellow there for 5 years or 6 years, and decided that it was time to get a real job. So I was hired as a tenured track professor at Florida International University, Miami. And I was there in 1986 as a faculty member in biology, in the biological sciences, teaching science students, pre-meds, ultimately. Anyways, so I was there for a number of years, and then in 2006, I decided, prior to that, I used to come back home on a regular basis to visit so that I maintain my connection with Liberia. I should also mention that my last semester as a graduate student at Howard University, that was in 1980, I had plans of coming back home to teach at the medical school. And I came I think it may have been December of 79, with the idea of coming back to teach. I recall there was a Romanian who was in charge of anatomy at the medical school, and I'm an anatomist, and the idea was I was coming back to replace him as a Liberian. And then the coup took place. And like I said, prior to that, when I left to go to school in 1970 to McGill, I would come back home every year to keep that connection. And then the coup took place in 1980. I didn't come back again until 1986 when my dad died. I came back maybe twice, and the last time I was home during that period was 1989, and then now 2006, when Madame Sirleaf became president of the university. I mean, not president, president of the nation. And so I came back in 2006 to see how I could help, and did some courses, taught some classes, actually, not some courses, taught some classes at the medical school, neuroscience, neuroanatomy. And actually, I had not planned on doing that. I happened to, it was just to be here for about 3 weeks or a month, see how things were. And then I learned that the person who was supposed to teach the neuroanatomy course, his wife had died. And so they asked me to, instead of the students not being taught that semester, if I could help. I said, no, I didn't come here today, I didn't come prepared. But anyways, I went over there, got some books from the medical college, did a couple of lectures. And I actually did 4 or 5 lectures where they were long lectures, couple of hours each, to provide the students with a foundation. And I promised that I would come back the next year, which I did in 2007. And I actually brought a colleague with me who was Indian from Malaysia who had never been to Africa. And we all came on our own dime. Nobody paid us. Nobody paid her. We just came. I taught the neuroanatomy course to medical students. And she actually taught 2 courses, molecular biochemistry and something else, I can't remember, to the medical school students. That was 2007. And then I came back again in 2009, did some talks, and decided that in 2011 I would take a sabbatical, and I came back to Liberia. I served as a technical advisor to the dean of the medical college, that's Dr. G. Gulakai, and taught a biology of AIDS course to non-science majors at the University of Liberia. And then, so I was here for 6 months during that period. And when you're on sabbatical, after the year, you have to go back to your parent institution, which I did. And then I was trying to figure out how I could get back home, to help. So we were able to work out something that my university, Florida International, and I have to thank them. They loaned me to the University of Liberia for a year. So I was seconded to the University of Liberia, and I came. This was during Dr. Emmett Dennis' tenure as president of the university. This is a long response to a question that you asked about how I managed to come back. But so Dr. Dennis was the president then, and we created an arrangement where I was still at Florida International University as a faculty member, but I was being loaned to the University of Liberia for a year. And that was I came in December of 2012, so in essence starting from 2013. And so it was a fantastic year. They asked me to serve as Dean for the College of Science and Engineering at the University of Liberia, which I did. And after the first year, just as we were getting things off the ground, Ebola hit. And so I communicated with my university and I said to them, I cannot leave in the middle of a crisis. They said, you better come back here, Ebola. I said, no, I can't. The captain doesn't, jump ship and leave the people, So I stayed, and at the university, they said, okay, you could stay for a year. So I was here for a year. We did various things to help the students and the neighbor and the communities that were around the university, taught them about things that they needed to do. We had a committee. But in essence, so I stayed for that year. And then after the year, I asked to stay for another year to continue with what I was doing. Now we're in 2015. And then in 2016, the university asked me to serve as Vice President for Academic Affairs, which I agreed to for a year. And when I went back to my school, I said, can I stay another year? They said, well, no, you need to make a decision. And so I decided, well, I've been at the university now for 30 years, Florida International. I could retire and continue to work at the university, which I did. This was when they asked me to serve as Vice President for Academic Affairs. So I retired in January or February of 2017 and was asked to serve as president of the University of Liberia. Dr. Dennis retired from the presidency. And so the university that my dad served as president, I also now served as president of the University of Liberia. And I served in that capacity for 2 years. A new government came in to being, and in 2019, a new president was put in place. And so you ask why I came back. I came back because Liberia needed me more than the United States. I would not have come back during a time when things were, I'm not that crazy, when things were potentially dangerous. I had every intention when I got through my education from 1980 that I would be coming back home. And I did come back home. And I have every intention of staying, no matter what. And like I said, when I made that decision, I also intended to build a place in Crozierville. So it took me about 4 or 5 years to build this house. In my family, my immediate family, since 1988, we've been having family reunions. They've been usually in the United States. And then in 2012, it was in Liberia. And it was here in Liberia in 2012 that we decided in 2020 it was going to be in Barbados. But then COVID-19 happened, and it was postponed for this year. And COVID-19 is still happening, so it's not going to happen yet. As a matter of fact, Barbados, the island had a major campaign called Coming Home. I can't remember, but there's where people from Barbados that are in the diaspora, for them to come back. And the president, is it president or prime minister now? I've forgotten now. There's a major push to get Liberians who can show their connection to Barbados to also have citizenship in Barbados, so that there can be that tie. And there is also, there are efforts afoot to bring folks from Barbados to Liberia to develop, to Crozierville specifically, to see what kinds of projects can be developed between the island and the township as well. A sort of sister relationship, sister-brother relationship, sister-sister relationship. And so there are efforts to make that connection with relatives that are in Barbados and in Liberia. And we hope that with the family tree that's genetic, with the connections through oral history and other ways of connecting, through probably business ventures, we can create a link or a pipeline between the island and the township, and keep that connection going. For me, it's a no-brainer that I would be coming back home to do what I could to help. And now, after working at the university and asking to serve with the center is being built, both the physical and the intellectual aspect of the center, of the EJA Center. And originally my intention was to come to Crozierville after I left the university and help build Crozierville, because I have this undying thought and aspiration for Crozierville to be a destination. And every time something comes up, I say, "Oh yeah, let's build it in Crozierville." And people laugh, and my brothers laugh, and who will come and who will buy it? I am strongly of the opinion, build it and they will come. And Crozierville has a lot to offer. The air is clean. It's got good farmland. It's got hills and creeks and valleys. And it's not far from Monrovia. It's about 15 miles, 20 at the most. It's close to the University of Liberia Fendel campus. You can cross the bridge from the White Plains direction, Cardwell. You can get to the airport by 15 Gate, not too far from. And I was talking about connection with Reeves and Crozierville. I was talking to some of my siblings not too long ago, and I said, what, wouldn't it be great? We know that townships are about 8 miles square miles, and here in Crozierville, our main street is Lemongrass Street. It would be great if we, from the monument where you see the Welcome to Crozierville sign, to the bridge where White Plains begins, if we were to put street lights and light up Crozierville. And that could be very easily done with solar. We get a lot of sun and rain. So we could get Croziervillians to sponsor a street light. And each street light should cost about $200. And it could be easily done. That would help with livening up the township. It could also help with commerce in the township as well. So light up Crozierville. And even in the various villages, could get the villages together and say, okay, in this village, you pay 50% of the cost of the light, the township will pay the other 50%, so there's ownership. And so even in the villages, in the township of Crozierville, we have light. Which is always that I look forward to seeing Crozierville be a destination. That when people come to Liberia, they feel that their visit is incomplete until they come to visit Crozierville. And I sincerely hope that Croziervillians who are in the diaspora and Croziervillians who live right here in Monrovia will come back and do something to help build this once dynamic township that produced so many dynamic people in Liberia who made their marks not only in Liberia but outside of Liberia as well. So come home. Come home to Crozierville. Many of the people who were on the Brig Cora and were people who helped shape Liberia as it was developing. That ship arrived, I said, in 1865. It was actually on May 10th, 1865. And that date we refer to as Founders' Day for the township of Crozierville. And so Crozierville has, as small as it is, has made a tremendous impact on the history and development of Liberia. A large number of people think that it was only people that came from the United States, but there were people that came from the islands most specifically the large number of people that came. Well, in the scheme of things, 300 and something people that came from Barbados. There's a very strong tie there with Barbados. And if you look in today, if you were to look in the phone book in Barbados, you will see a lot of names that look familiar. Bradwith, like I said, Grimes, Holder, Weeks, Barclay, etc., that have ties. If you don't talk about or do things to memorialize the accomplishments of folks that came before, they will be lost. I think that it will be a tremendous disservice to those who made so many sacrifices to help build Liberia when Liberia needed its citizens to help build it. And there are people who made such tremendous contributions that we cannot afford. You know, there needs to be a book that's written or a story that's told of the heroes we should never forget. And so the only way to do that is to do something like this, to talk about them, to do things in their honor, and to continue the work that's not finished. The work that the dreams were deferred. And so I'll do my part. And I sincerely hope that those that have connections here in Crozierville, I mean in Liberia in general, but I'm talking about Crozierville now, because things are done a little bit at a time. Croziervillians can do it here. People in Carisburg or a village in Grand Cru or a town in Maryland, Hopper. We all, little by little. I heard of a young man who is from Lofa, and he's not young anymore. He's of a certain age, like mine. But his wife is there in Lofa, and she has built a school, elementary school. And if you were to hear those kids at that school, you would think it was a school somewhere outside of Liberia. And so we can all do our little parts in our various areas where we have connections, because you're motivated to do something when you have an emotional tie or connection. And if we all do our little part here, there, and yonder, it will become the whole. And Liberia can get that much further, that much quicker. So we owe it to our ancestors that their labors were not in vain, that their dreams will become a reality. And we have to continue to call their names so that they're never forgotten. Think about the fact that there was a call for people of African descent to come help build Liberia. And the people of Barbados responded in 1865, and they came to help build Liberia. Liberia went through almost 20 years of war. And the infrastructure was practically completely destroyed. And you know, the thing is, I always think that, yes, there were lots of things that happened that were inequities in the building of this nation. And yet, and still as small as Liberia was, it was such an impactful country in Africa and around the world. Liberia's contribution with the United Nations. Liberia's contribution in the formation of the Organization of African Unity, now the AU. Liberia's contribution to World War II in stopping it. Liberia's contribution to so many things. And what people fail to realize is that many of the leaders of some of our surrounding African countries got their university education at the University of Liberia. Liberia was the country that people looked to. And we were on the brink of just going beyond wherever it is we were. We manufactured things. We exported things. We had a very thriving seafood production business here in Liberia. And there were so many other things and then we had the war. And it lasted for almost 2 decades. Infrastructure was destroyed. And people can't stop to grasp the magnitude of this. For 15 years, when we used to you turn the faucet on and you knew that water was going to come on. And you switched the light and you knew there was going to be electricity. And there were paved roads, and there were all of these things that we don't have now. It's almost like we're starting anew. And so there may be a parallel in coming back to help rebuild Liberia and coming back to help rebuild the nation. But I never really thought about it from that perspective until the question was posed. All I thought of was this was the country that made me who I am. The foundation of the person that I am came from here. It came from my elementary school here. It came from my kindergarten here. It came from my elementary school. It came from my high school. It came from my University of Liberia. And the fact that I was competitive enough to compete with people from other places and excel tells you that it was a foundation that was solid. And we need to do what we can. And it's not difficult. And the fact is, Liberia is a small country. We're only about 5 million people. We can make a change in a short period of time if we put Liberia first and center and put ourselves behind. And the other part about this that I think that leaders need to know is that when you become a leader, it's no longer about you. When you become a leader, it's no longer about you. And if we think about it in that way, and if we think about Liberia in that way, we can build even better and faster. Like I said, with this small number of people and the vast land and the potential that we have, there should be want for nothing if we work together. When you look at the manifest of the Brig Cora, you see that they were seamstress because all of the passengers are named, their profession, the number of children that were with them, etc. So they were carpenters, and there were teachers, and there were confectioners, and there were bakers, there were coppersmiths, and welders, and so people with skills were on that ship. And one of the things that the government of Liberia did when families arrived, families were given 25 acres of land to settle on. And they provided them in this area to settle. And if it were a single person, they got, I think, about 15 acres to settle on and to develop. And the name Crozier is Samuel Crozier, who's from Pennsylvania. I think it was, from Pennsylvania. It was Samuel and Joan Crozier that were very instrumental. They're from the States in helping to fund the Brig Cora, the trip to Liberia. And I suspect that the citizens, the people who were on that ship, thought that it was fitting to name the settlement Crozierville. So, hence the name Crozierville. There was a point in time in Liberia's history when the powers that be, the leadership, realized that Liberia needed more skilled people, workers, to help build this developing nation, Liberia. So there was a call out to people of African descent around the world, globally, to come and help build this place called Liberia. And it was also during a period of time when slavery was being abolished. And in places where there were islands, there's a set amount of land. And case in point, Barbados. So when you have all these freed slaves, where do they go? When land is already owned, you have a limited amount of land and they're owned by the plantation owners. Where do they go? One alternative would be to go and continue to work for the people who they worked for before, and then no longer be considered a slave, right? And so this was a great opportunity for Barbadians, for Bajans, to say, let's go there and help. And there was a tremendous interest. I think it was Christchurch Parish, largely, that the majority of people that were on that Brig Cora came from. And there were many attempts to make that journey. And for one reason or other, it didn't happen. It was going to happen. There was not enough funds. It was this, that, or the other. And finally, in April, I can't remember the exact date, they set sail. I think there were about 344 thereabouts that set a sail. Not a single person died on that journey. As a matter of fact, there were a few more than were on the ship when they left. There are many Liberians and the next generation of people whose parents and grandparents were Liberians who've never seen Liberia. And I think that if they were to just come and visit and see, they might change their minds, because you can't force somebody to come to a place that they know very little about. And I think that it's the parents and grandparents who need to probably put that bug. In 2009, I think it was, I said to my nieces, we're at a Christmas party, it was in the States, we're all drinking, and I said, oh, if you want to come next Christmas, Auntie will pay for you all to come to Liberia. Well, I forgot about it, but it didn't. And then it dawned on me, uh-oh. So there were 3 of them. One was 8 at the time. One was, I think, 15 or 16 or 18 or something like that. But it was 8, 15, and probably 18 or 17. And they came to Liberia. and one of my other nieces came. Only one had been here before, but I say had been here, I'm using that loosely. She was born here, but when her parents left, she was still a baby. And they have subsequently come back. And one of them came back, worked here for many years, went back, got her master's degree, came back and worked, and currently is working in Nigeria. Say this to say that those young Liberians who have never been here, why would they want to? Unless there is a reason to, or they find a connection. And it's different when you talk about Liberia in the UK or in the US, and you get together there and you have a picnic or a party and you go back to your respective places. The younger generation don't have those ties. They have to, I think, come to Liberia and see where their parents grew up. And I think there's a curiosity there. They might find a connection, they might not. But let them have that opportunity to find that connection. The other thing is that there's so much potential here. And there's so much that can be done here. That if a person's hardworking and creative and innovative and motivated, they can do so much more. It will be harder. There's no question about it. It'll be harder because we do not have a lot of the resources, but you can pave the way. And there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I want to say that light at the end of the tunnel is not a mirage. It's not a mirage.